Sesim geliyor mu? Tamam.
Yetiş. Alp Hocam.
Hocam
Başlayınca bana haber et. Ben istersen hemen herkese yollayayım, öyle başla.
Shall I start? Okay. Okay. All right. Assalamu alaikum everyone, and good afternoon, and thank you very much for being here today. As you know, we've had a long break, unfortunately, due to circumstances beyond our control. But I'm really grateful that Kasım Hoca has been able to make the adjustment for us at Istanbul University's Islamic Studies Center. Kasım Hoca, I've known him for a long time, and I'm really grateful that he gave me the opportunity to invite him here at our center to talk about his subject. Just a brief bio about Kasım Hoca for some of you who may not know him, although I don't feel the need to do that. But Kasım Hoja graduated from the School of Law and Sharia at Al-Azhar University in Cairo, and then from the Hukuk Faculty of Istanbul University. He studied history and sociology at Binghamton University in the United States of America, where he earned his MA in Ottoman history. He then completed his PhD doctorate at the same university with the title Reproduction of the Ottoman Legal Knowledge, the case of Ibrahim al-Halabi's Multaka al-Abhur, and defining the concept of Baghi in commentarial writings on it in the 16th to the 18th century. I'm not going to talk too much now in that sense. I'll leave the floor to Kasım Hoca. But once again, Kasım Hoja, thank you very much for accepting our invitation, and the floor is yours.
Okay. Thank you, Yaqub Hoca, for generous invitations and then elaborate descriptions and then introductions. I appreciate that. Definitely, I would love with my heart and mind to say that thank you from the bottom of my heart for organizing this opportunity and giving us a chance to speak about Ibrahim al-Halabi, his book of Multaka al-Abhur, and how we have reframed his work and the work on his work on the Ottoman historical process, and then in our modern time what it would mean to us from that point of view. In fact, I personally started I started to know about Multaka al-Abhur, Ibrahim al-Halabi from very young age, like 13, 14 years of age, when I was studying in the school in Rize, Güneysu, Potomya, where my teacher taught us about Arabic grammar, the classical Arabic grammar, and then he told us one day that we will start fiqh, and we didn't know what to do. Of course, we were just studying Quran and other things, and he said we'll start fiqh learning, and he said there's a book called Multaka al-Abhur, and we got the book and we started reading from it by the help of the teacher, classical methodologies. But I didn't know the Multaka is like somehow will end up part of my academic life in terms of the study of the Islamic law in the Ottoman Empire. And when I decided to study about the Multaka, the process of going through the studying the Multaka al-Abhur was through one of the professor, late professor, may Allah give rahmah on his soul, Rifat Ebul Hajj. We had several topics that taken out of the Multaka, how can we frame the Multaka as a historical study, not just fiqh, but as a historical study. That's what I will try to present here, try to make us to see what would be there besides the multaka presenting us fiqh norms, besides that. And I divided this topic today into three main areas. One is emergence of the multaka itself. Multaka is being written. We are speaking about like a early 16th century, 15th, 17th. Actually, that's the time when it is written. And how multaka emerged, and then what is it? What is its position within the studies of the fiqh, within the production of the fiqh knowledge, within the production of the fiqh books and XYZ. Second is multaka's gaining discursive authority. I'm saying this, it's a kind of like a discursism. We don't use it in the 16th century as a discursive authority. We use like a book, Sharia, and Butun al-Mu'tabara, the things that reflects their vocabulary. In a modern time, when we look at how the society operates and continues their life, how it is legitimized itself, how the politics works and culture works all together, we end up speaking about this discourse, something like what are said and how it is said, and what's the position that what is said and how it is reflected and reproduced throughout the historical process from that point of view. So that's where I spoke about multakas and looked at specifically about multakas gaining that discursive authority. Everyone would refer to multaka as something as an authority, a legal discursive authority, of course. And under that title, I will speak about the production of the commentaries on the multaka, in which via multaka, persons would be called like a sharh al-multaka and something like that. So we speak about that one. And then public controversy and how the multaka is being situated within the public controversies in the Ottoman discursive tensions and discursive productions and those elements in the Ottoman intellectual world from that. As a last section, I will speak about status appropriation of the multaka, trying to bring the multaka being appropriated from its native, natural places where it's being produced, consumed, and reproduced, consumed, and kind of moved into the frame of the status approach, and that's a modern phenomenon. At the time when modern nation states start to come out, multaka is being reframed in a different way. We are able to see that, we are able to trace that reframing. In fact, recently I was able to publish an article on this subject specifically. We were able to see, for example, in thesis also, where the Western writers start to speak about the multaka first as a multaka, as a fiqh book. Later on, by late 18th century, and then multaka is being discussed in the Western Western authorship as code of state, as a law of state. So it is not anymore fiqh, just fiqh, but code of state. And we will speak about that. And that has created tensions within the discursive framing of the multaka, how you speak about the multaka. And so let me start with the first emergence of the multaka. And Ibrahim al-Halabi, it's interesting that he is from Aleppo. He was living at this time under the Mamluk zone of the regions. He roughly, we don't know exactly his childhood, his educations, and we know some bibliographical mention of his being imam or his being studied in Aleppo. He went to the Cairo and those things. Going through fast about this part because we don't have too much information, but surrounding information is important, but I wasn't able to enter that. Surrounding information at that time, by late 15th century in Aleppo, there was a lot of in and out activities, and the scholars like the Hanafi-oriented scholars are coming from the Aleppo and going outside Aleppo, and then interactions between Aleppo and Cairo. Those are interesting things to see as a cultural milieu in terms of where the intellectual dynamism was strong there. It's time when there is still discourse, especially when the Suyuti, Imam Ibrahim Halabi has met the Suyuti himself. He was discussing and speaking about the unity of the Ummah, Khilafah, and a lot of those elements that relate to the Muslim unity, relates to the Muslim conceptual uniformity and all these things. And that's the time that Ibrahim Halabi is growing up in Aleppo. They went to Cairo. Then in 1490s, there's indications that he was in Damascus. In the bibliographies, we don't see that much, too much speaking about that early bibliographies, but we have seen one of the Tensir of the book. He wrote that I have copied this book in Damascus. He writes about that, so we learn from that he has been in Damascus also. And Damascus, Aleppo, Mamluk zone is a multi-mazhab zone. There's a Hanafi, Shafi, Maliki, Hanbalis, and they are Qadis, Qadi, Qudat. Hanafis are secondary to Shafis overall when you look at it. So he moves to Istanbul, and when he comes to Istanbul, he lives there all his life. The half of his life, the rest of his life when he moved to Istanbul, he spent in Istanbul. So like about 50 years he spent in Istanbul, and he dies in Istanbul. His grave is just close by here, on the Edirne Kapı Makbara here. And in Istanbul, what he did, he was a preacher in the Fatih Mosque. He was a khatib, and at the same time khutbah giver, the khatib al-khutbah from that point of view. He was he wasn't appointed as mudarris in the madrasa systems, but from the bibliographical sources and his writings, we know that he was having a lot of students from, so private students that would be able to. So he was active in teaching, active in writings on issues that is not only fiqh, on controversial issues also, in the sense that he wrote about Ibn Arabi, very severely criticized him. He is saying his thought is destructive for the religion. That's his approach to the subject that Ibn Arabi brought up, rahmatullah alayhi altogether. And he wrote about the Sufi practices like raqs and sema, Sufi rituals. He rejected those ones. He has a pamphlet on that one, which indicates it was circulating among his students at least. He wrote about the jawaz of the standing up for the respect of the hudur of the Prophet ﷺ when there is a Mawlid al-Nabi, the big issue in Pakistan. We talked about that was in 16th century an issue that he wrote about that issue also. So he is publicly engaged. But he was very reserved to himself. He wasn't, in the bibliographical sources, we know that he would go to masjid and come to his home. Go to masjid, come to. He would not discuss with anyone. He would not have like a public presence in the around the Fatih Mosque to discuss the things from that. So there's no. If you look for public sphere formulated through his discourses and his students, we don't see too much of that one. But on the other hand, we have him as an active teacher, writer, and these things. He wrote about the fiqh also, in terms of beside the Multaqa al-Aqur, about the specific the salah and other ritual part of the Islamic practices. Now, the book that he wrote came out in 1517. I call these books writings that Multaqas being written as a product of the civil process, which means like a quote-unquote civil, because we don't have a modern state to speak about the civil society. So of course there's the nuances there, but we have state-related activities at that time as can be distinguished from the non-state-related activities. Besides the Multaqa, for example, we have Durar. Durar is written by Qadi of the state, Mufti of the state. And also he says in the book, Mullah Khusraw says in the book that I'm writing this for an answer for our needs to solve the problems of the state. Problems of the Qadiship, of judiciary and all these things. In Multaqa we don't see that type of this state-related connections. Of course, fiqh by nature has a connections, but as a production, as an aim of writing the book, there is no dedication to Sultan. There is nothing that relates to anyone that who is to the judiciary. In fact, He's being like a non-official person, maybe good suited for this type of the product also. But on the other hand, when Alakban scholar writes about his biography, Shaqaiq al-Numaniya writes about his biography, very short. He speaks about Arab Hoja, Ibrahim al-Halabi, Sheikh Arab Hoja. There are several Arab Hoja also from that. And then he would speak about that, but there is no mention of his being like how his knowledge is needed by officials of the state. But on the other hand, Alakban scholars, when they write about him, and one of the biography says, the Mufti of the Rumiyun, like a Mufti of the Anatolia, right? So that's Alakban writing for him, right? The Mufti of the the Ottoman state, Shaykh al-Islam, would ask Ibrahim al-Halabi for difficult questions to answer them. So Saadi Chalabi, they were close to each other. In fact, at the end of his life, when Ibrahim al-Halabi was like towards the end of his life, Saadi Chalabi opened a Darul Qurra. Darul Qurra is not like a madrasa system, but it's a place where Quran is being specifically studied. You know, Darul Hadith and Darul Qurra has a separate status within the Ottoman system of the Ilmiya and those things. He was able to be head of that Darul Qurra, but not the madrasas. You know, he wasn't getting to madrasa. From that point of view, we can see that there's a strong connections with Saadi Chalabi, Mufti Saadi Chalabi, and Ibrahim al-Halabi, and there is a connection. I'm not saying there's no connection, but production of this book is just civil environment. It's a dynamics there, fiqh activity. Dynamic is just like a ilmul fiqh, knowledge of it, teaching of it, studying of, learning, understanding, and that's there. In fact, at the early part of the book, he says, one of the person asked me to write the book, and that's interesting to see from that. And he says, one in here, maybe you may not be able to see it exactly or not, in the introductory part of it, he says, but this is Qaid al-Faragh, we call that, where the author writes about when he completed to say this is finished, and he gives us date here, 923, which makes like a Rajab, month of Rajab 923, which makes August 4, 1517, roughly, right? 1517. And then this is the year that there are several other copies also gives us that he wrote the book, completed it, Tabyid, and then Tansir, right? Tabyid, you complete like a last drop, the version of it, and then he was able to record that one. But he lived up to now is 1517. He died 1549. So there is about like 30 years, roughly around 30 years, that he was still active and engaged in the work, whatever he was doing. And then, therefore, this book, there are another copy of Multaqa al-Abhur is said to written 1929. He says Farida, or like completed the writing of this nuskha specifically 929, which means 1523. He also says at the beginning of that, the original one was 1517, so he refers to that one. So this means like a cup on the top of the cup. But we don't know exactly who wrote this one though, as a tansir. We're not sure whether Ibrahim Halabi himself or someone else. But it shows like during this time, there are several of these copies, I didn't bring all of them here, written to increase the copy for the study. And then we have later on,
first one, Yavuz, and second one, Kanuni.
As a time, there is since you brought up this issue of the Yavuz and Kanuni, there is a claim, the Hammer made this claim first, but it wasn't founded at all, claim is that Kanuni Sultan Süleyman ordered this book to be written, but that's false. Definitely, it's impossible, because 1517 he wrote it, and there is no order in the there is no order in the bibliographical sources, in other sources. There is no order in the archival documents, and also there is another claim that Mahmud has ordered this book to be used by Qadis as a legal book. All of those discussions start to emerge at the time of the modern time, after 18th century, when there's a discussion and debate about state needs to have a certain law, positive law. That's the time when there's a recreating of the Multaqa's position retrospectively, as such that Sultan has ordered, we have it here, type of the things, and that's a modern phenomenon. It's in its emergence, that's not the case. And then that was one of the major questions, and I looked at specifically because that issue ties us to another issue, that when first early Islamic history, when fiqh books started to come out, there was an effort by the Abbasid state and trying to recruit a book as a standard law of the country. I mean, not country today's sense, but kingdom, right, from that. And there was a resistance against that. And we have these records from Imam Malik, rahmatullahi alayhi. There are several reports about these issues, that there was an effort to have uniform law of the state. And then scholars would say, no, because we don't want to limit the Islamic opinion in one state sanctioned book from that point of view. You know, the Imam Abu Hanifa and those other issues from that point of view. So that's interesting. It wasn't there. So I was looking more like so it didn't happen there, but did it happen in Ottoman time? That Ottoman made this book into one uniform book. But in fact, that's not the case. But by nature, scholars use the Multaqa a lot. I mean, it's a handbook of the Qadis. You could see these things that as a, that's the reason I'm saying it's a discursive authority. It's not a political authority. It's not a state authority. It's a discursive book gained strength within the field that Qadis would refer to this book as well as other books like Hidayah and the Durar and others. So it is not like a one book that is formulating the whole legal corpus of this, but it's just a range of the books there from that point of view. So that was one question that I specifically looked at it, but there's no state appropriation of the book before the modern time discourse about that. In that sense, modern state and the law relations between state and law. And so there is another copy of the book. I just want to mention this one also. In this, it's interesting. This is a Yale copy of the book. It's 3 times Temme Tebyid. It means like this book is completed in this time. That gives us 923. It gives us 923, which means 1517. That's the first same date is put here, and this looks like very close to maybe Ibrahim Halabi's his own writing, but he himself says it, but we are not sure still, because this the claim that this is an original copy is an interesting claim. At the modern time, it became more important and more contested, from that point of view, and that's a different subject. But then we have in another says وَوَقَعَ الْفَرَاغ مِنْ هَذِهِ النُّسْخَةِ, which means like specifically from this nuscha. It's 1517, and then another copy, another statement comes and says وَوَقَعَ الْفَرَاغ مِنْ هَذِهِ النُّسْخَةِ بَيْنَ الصَّلَاتَيْنِ مِنْ يَوْمِ الْأَحَدِ السَّابِعِ عَشْرِينَ, which means 1524. So 1517, 1524. At the end of the book, author speaks about that is the original written, then it is written, then it is written again. And in this specific book, there's a lot of marginal notes. And that's my guess that it's very possible that Ibrahim Halabi himself, by 1524, had a note on this book, and he has reproduced his own book. And I looked at the body issue. Is there a differences there? I didn't see, but it can be thoroughly studied to find out if there's any differences between the nusakh, and I'm working on that part in a certain specific level. Now this is emergence of the book. I don't want to spend too much time, but in creating the book, in writing the book, Ibrahim Halabi says, this is in his introduction, this is in all the copies we see that one. فَقَدْ سَأَلَنِي بَعْضُ, here you see, okay, بَعْضُ طَالِبِهِ الْإِسْتِفَادَةِ. You see here, بَعْضُ طَالِبِهِ الْإِسْتِفَادَةِ. فَقَدْ سَأَلَنِي, is it visible there? And أَجْمَعَ لَهُ كِتَابًا, that it says لَهُ, so these are one student. So there's a lot of discussion, who is this one student? And we are not able to find him, who is the one student here. It can be sometimes just like a cliche, someone asked me, I wrote it. But it seems like for him, there is a strong student and teacher relations, and he has a strong student relations. I may have some guess, but I'm not sure, so I don't want to speculate about that. In this case, we don't see who asked him, but then the book, before 1600, by 1517 it's written, 1520s and 30s and 40s, and still Ibrahim Halabi is alive. In Istanbul, there are nusakh came out, and as a commentary on it, in Istanbul, we don't have anyone in our hands. There's two more authors, and their names are here, but they are said that they wrote a commentary on it, but we don't have them. But the earliest extant commentary which we have in our hand came from Syria, in Damascus. Commentary on two scholars. One is Bahtani, other is Bahnesi. See here, right? Al-Bahnesi, 1578 he died. Al-Bahtani, 1595. This is interesting in the sense that I have, past those couple things here. I can come back to them, but let me speak about this Bakhani and this issue. Ibrahim Halabi writes the book in Istanbul. He has connections with the Syrian ulama. He has connections with the Aleppan ulama. We see these things from his visit. The Aleppan scholars come and visit him. This is mentioned, and in fact, one of the Radiyuddin from the Damascus comes and visits him. He says, I met him, I had taken from his tafsir, Ayat al-Kursi, I wrote my own tafsir, gave it to the Ibrahim Pasha, and I was able to get my positions in Aleppo secured again after the change of the hands in Aleppo. And there is a strong connections between Aleppo scholars and Istanbul scholars, and then here we see these things in historically documented. Ibrahim Halabi's Multaka is received, we don't know exactly how, but it was received by Allama al-Bahnasi. Bahnasi is a mufti of the Damascus, but not an official mufti. He's not an official, it's well-known khatib of the Masjid al-Amawi, well-respected scholars, big scholar. A lot of students of Hanafi madhab graduated under his hands. As I said earlier, the Damascus was more like a Shafi, the Mamluk times, the Shafi is more preferred over the Hanafis and from certain positions. There are a lot of debates about those things there. But he himself was a well-respected scholar of the Hanafi madhab and also public figure and giving fatwa. He was giving fatwa, meaning that he wasn't officially appointed to give fatwa, but scholars are recognizing him de facto as scholar, that his fatwa is trustable, so he was in that position. Bahnasi taught fiqh, Ibrahim al-Halabi, fiqh, the Multaqa, and his students, Al-Batani says, I studied with my teacher all of the book. In fact, he says, it is me that Bahnasi says, one of my students asked me to write the book. I am the one I asked him, he says. So I have that here, I copied here. So it is interesting to see this in Damascus scholarship, that they are upholding the Multaka with the sharh on it, and Bahnasi didn't finish his share, that's a detail, but then Barkani did finish his own share. We have some analysis of what he says in terms of the Baghi and all these things. But it's interesting, later on, late 1700, the Haskafi, another scholar from the Aleppan origin, Haskafi writes about this chain of readership of Multaka from teacher. He says, I read it from my teacher here, he read it from that teacher here, he read it from that, you know, the Ijazah chain. He goes to Barkani. That Ijazah chain, in fact, is, if you look at it from the authority formation point of view, it's a informal legal authority format for the book, saying that this is authentic and it is there's a structure of that maintains that authenticity of it, maintain that strength of it, and that's interesting point from the Multakas taking this strength in that sense. And then Haskafi's book, when the print came, when the time of printing started to emerge and books started printed, two books printed together. One is Damad Efendi, and other is Haskafi's as a Sharh of Multaka. So that's one of the most famous. It's many times printed. So it is one from the central of Ottoman Sultan, Ottoman state. Other is from the periphery, Haskafi. Both together is combined together and printed together. So there are some other issues there in terms of like when it is printed, Haskafi, some of the comments were dropped out at the introduction, and there are, you know, from that's a different. So it's interesting to point here for authority formation for the Multaka. You see this development of this scholarly, civil, scholarly, intellectual activities where the Multaka gains the strength. It becomes addition to Mutun al-Mu'tabara. We call Mutun al-Mu'tabara in the fiqh. When you give any fatwa, when you give anything that is related to the Islamic law, you would refer to one of those Mu'tabar books. So that would create legitimacy for your opinion from that point of view. So among the Mutun al-Mu'tabara, within Ottoman Sultan, for example, Durar is not counted in the Mutun al-Mu'tabara, although it's very strongly used. Ibn Abidin counts 8 of them, all of them before Ottoman time. Only Multaka is from Ottoman time, and Ibn Abidin himself is from Damascus scholars, right? I don't know, is that any function there or any relations there, but it's just to mention it from that point of view that yes.
These two, Kasım bin Süleyman and Ali bin Abdullah al-Halabi mentioned.
Yeah, they are.
Shaqaiq.
Yeah, they are mentioned there. They are there, but they are. We don't have the nuskha of their books. Therefore, I wasn't able to study them specifically. But they are. You know, there is a 70 some sharh is mentioned for the Multaka. Out of this 70, I was able to locate around more clearly, without doubt, about like 29 of them, because some of them are like it says Sharh Multaka. Then you look at the inside the book, who's the writer. One book has two same writers, and there are a lot of complications that to designate and specifically know how many actual book emerged. But as I mentioned, we have this one. Of course, it's very possible that there are books are written, and it's not in our hands. In fact, one of the book, Nablusi Mufti says, I wrote a Multaka Sharh, and he gets the money from the state because he says, I will speak about that later on, and he says, I was busy with writing the Sharh, so I couldn't have a livelihood, so I need some help from the Sultan, so Sultan gives him some help. So it is given to him as a Sharh Multaka. Now Sharh Multaka becomes a public image that, you know, if you are a Sharh of Multaka, you are a publicly, you know, good standing positions there from that point of view. And that's in 17th century, 17th and 18th century all. Now, so the Bahnasi and Barkani is a true significant figure in authorization of the Multaka. Now let me go to some writings of the Bahnasi. Here, he says that I am the one who wrote this Sharh. This is in fact a copy that we have in New York Public Library. We don't have any other copies. It's incomplete Sharh on the Multaqa. But he says, I'm the one who wrote this. You know, here's the name Bahnasi, rahmahullah, right? Yeah. Muhammad Sheikh Muhammad.
تمت القطعة المباركة.
Yeah, تمت القطعة المباركة, which means this qit'a, because he didn't complete the book yet. So they're up to the bay'ah, it's there, so this is not after that. In fact, his student Bahnasi, Barkani, says that my teacher asked me to write a commentary on this one. So there is a overlap between his writings and his writings together. So that's another issue. But Bakani, his student, had a full commentary. So we have that in our hands. In fact, if you look at here, that's his commentary. Majr al-Anhur ala Multaqa al-Abhur, completed 1587. This is the full completed Multaqa al-Abhur in our hands as a sharh on the Multaqa al-Abhur, as a full completed of it. Yes, exactly. Here he says, وَكُنْتُ أَنَا السَّبَبِ, I was the reason, ذَلِكَ بِقِرَاءَةِ عَلَيْهِ الْمَتْنِ وَطَلَبِ مِنْهُ ذَلِكَ وَإِشَارَ إِلَيْهِ فِي الدِّبَاجِ بِقَوْلِهِ وَقَدْ طَلَبَ مِنِّي شَرْحُهُ بَعْضَ الْمُرِيدِينَ مِنْ أَفَاضِلِ. So he says, I am the... I'm Mutaraddidin, I'm sorry, I'm just from Mutaraddidin min al-Afadil, meaning like they were coming to me as a student from that. And in fact, I have written that one here fully. It says, Barkani says it was me who caused him to write a sharh on Multaqa by me studying the text of the Multaqa under his supervision and me asking him to write a commentary on it. My teacher says in his introduction that a virtuous one who studied Multaqa with me asked me to write a commentary on it. No one else from amongst his students studied this method, Multaqa, with him except me. So he is putting him, this is like a show, like in Damascus, Multaqa is emerging as a one main Hanafi fiqh textbook and gaining this authority from that, you know, in that nuskha. Okay, let me go to, I don't know what's the time things that we are, I want to...
You've been 37 minutes.
37 minutes left, or what's, how long?
You've got about 10, 15 minutes.
10, 15? Because there's an issue here, Siwasi. I want to mention that one because I don't want to reduce the amount that I want to give the Siwasi. It is in the sense that Multaqa, you can say when the Ottoman Empire is from state emerging into an empire, right? And more of the larger sections of the area incorporated, consolidated into the system. Arabic-speaking people in the Ottoman world, definitely from the knowledge, legitimacy point of view, from the Sharia point of view, from the Islamic-based point of view, understanding of the Islamic traditions, Arabic has strong weight on the Muslim intellectuals around the world still today from that point of view. With this, you see, the Anatolia is integrated with Arabic-speaking people through the bridge of this Damascene scholarship there, you know, from that. That, I would say, you can, I'm not saying this is the one established this unity there, but it contributed towards integrations of the Ottoman judiciary into the system of the scholarly circles in Damascus, in Aleppo, even in Cairo, because there's a strong Hanafi traditions in Cairo too from that point of view. So that Multaqa place, but it's also, there's another level here. I will speak about that later on in this after public image. There is a, let me see where did I put that? Yes, here. There is a scholar that's called Shamsuddin Muhammad bin Mahmud al-Halabi. He was called, he has a book called Sharh al-Multaqa. He was called in Istanbul, he completed his book 1652. He called in Istanbul Sharh al-Multaqa. So his laqab, he's named as a Sharh al-Multaqa. So by 100 years after Ibrahim al-Halabi, the person who writes a good sharh on the book is called by this book, so Sharh al-Multaqa. And later on, we have in the 1670s a record is saying like So son of Sharh al-Multaqa. So as a biography describing him, is a son of Sharh al-Multaqa. Then we had in 1761, that's a Mustafa, Sayyid Mustafa bin Abdul Fattah al-Nablusi al-Tamimi. Nablusi is a mufti that I just mentioned earlier. He wrote to Sultan saying that I was busy with writing the Sharh on the Multaqa, and then the records of the letter that comes to center is, we have it in our hand, and also Jawab is in our hand, and also amount on how it is given to him in our, it's almost like today's you have a project, you get a public fund for it, so he's, after finishing his project, he gets his public fund. But we don't have the book yet. I mean, I couldn't locate it. Of course, it's most probably somewhere, but I couldn't locate it from the, and some of the shelves also doesn't mention like a Nablusi's work. So it is remained as a something to be discovered. And then let me go to next issue as a public, the Multaqa after gaining its authority, how it is publicly reproduced in a certain circles, in a conflicting situations. We have, as we know, by early 1600, early, the 1620s, 30s, 40s is a time when the Qadizadeli and Sufi and non-Sufi discussions became so much in Istanbul. And Ibrahim Halabi's, one of the things in that controversy was Sufi rituals, public Sufi rituals, right? which is in Arabic called raqs, which means like doing the sema and raqs, right? And ibadah of the, certain rituals, you get together, circle, and you do zikr of Allah in a certain movements and all these things. Ibrahim Halabi wrote against that. He says that's not from Islam. And he also, his risala on that is multiplied. So we have other people multiplied that risala, that means it has circulations from that. During this time, there is one of the Sivasi mufti. Sivasi are the one that who favor the Sufi practices. He would allow it, and he would just those. Let me make one claim. Ibrahim Halabi was very taqi, very zahid. So what is a controversy is not about like a taqi or being like a a pious person, being like a practicing a lot of nafila prayers and those things. He was definitely one of those guys. But on the other hand, public practice of this performance of those practices are debated about. That's where the discussion is. So Ibrahim Halabi speaks about against the Sufi rituals in a public, and Sivasi writes a fatwa. He's a member of the Sivasis in Sivas, in the city of Sivas. He's an official mufti of the Sivas. He's also tariqa representative of the Sivasis, and he wrote a fatwa that we have it. Professor Abdullah Karaman analyzed that fatwa, published it, and we have that fatwa outside, and it says that raqs is halal, right? So it is clear that this Sivasi mufti definitely know who is. It's clear that this Sivasi mufti would know that who is Ibrahim Halabi, definitely. What is his opinion? His fatwa, I mean, it could not be, unpublic to him. So he's taking position saying that for my understanding, it's halal, right? The fatwa is, the raqs is halal. At the same time, Sivasi himself writes a sharh on Multaqa. So he is a Sufi oriented, writing a sharh on the Multaqa because Multaqa is a public authority. Writing sharh on the Multaqa gains you public legitimacy, definitely. But for him to write sharh on the Multaqa, it seems like it shows like how the Ottoman intellectual world worked also as an integrative sources for each other. This is the reason I'm saying that in writing this sharh, he, in the Muqaddimah, I gave him long time here, but I wasn't able to read those things. In the Mukaddimah, in writing the book, he says that when my friend told me to write about it, I'm just paraphrasing what he says. My friend told me to write about it. I said, no, I'm not eligible to write, and I'm not sure about writing or not writing. But he says to me, in the Dibaje, he says, my friend tells me that you are a knowledgeable person, and Allah gave you this ni'mah, and you are responsible to bring out this ni'mah. So he says, now I'm obliged to write it, but I'm not sure, I have to take a permission to write it. So the permission comes, that's interesting point. He says, رَأَيْتُ ثُمَّ بَعْدَ بَرْحَةٍ مِنَ الزَّمَنِ. After a while from the time, رَأَيْتُ بَيْنَ النَّوْمِ وَالْيَقَظَةِ, between sleep and non-sleep, I saw a dream, كَأَنِّي شَرَعْتُ فِي بِنَاءِ الْمَنْزِلِ الْعَظِيمِ, as if I started to build like a big buildings. You know, manzil al-azim, you know, the huge, dominant, monumental things that he's speaking to build it. Bina wait, is not just keep going. It says, I'm sorry, okay. بين اليقظة كأني شرعت في بناء المنزل العظيم والبيت الفخم فإذا بهاتف يهتف من قبل الرحمن. There is a voice coming from the Rahman, and it says ويقول لك البشارة بأنك تتم هذا البنيان. So you must complete this binyan. This in fact gives him strong legitimacy in the eyes of the Sufi brothers and all those circles. And at the same time, it gains strong legitimacy in the eyes of the fuqaha. Right? He is a faqih. Whatever he is saying is a faqih. He's a sharih of multaqa. He is also doing this with the indications of permission coming from the invisible forces of the kawn, from that point of view. This is interesting to put it this way. I mean, from the fiqh point of view, of course, in the Islamic law, I'm not claiming that Islamic law, neither Siwasi, rahmatullah alayhi, none of those would claim that we can act on the dream as a halal or haram or do it or not. But for the activities, the something you are doing, you are not sure whether it's khair or not, you can, quote a dream saying that we did this by the dream, and dream has a place in Ottoman intellectual world, definitely. I mean, that's a different studies there when you look at it, how the dream are being interpreted discursively, integrated into the system of actions, political, cultural actions in the state from that point of view. Here, you see dream is working out to reproduce the multaka as an authoritative force to integrate the conflicting forces of the public controversies there. And when I looked at the Baghi, that's one of my main subject here, to study how the Baghi is interpreted. Siwasi, in the Baghi issue, doesn't speak about the in the Baghi, I looked at only ta'rif, on the definition of who are bughat. And then on the definition, khuruj ala al-imam. That's it. So the imam is interpreted, khuruj is interpreted as a shar. Siwasi, rahmatullah, doesn't interpret those things. He gives us tarikh. In the fiqh shar, he counts the name of those conflict between Ali radiallahu anh and the Muawiyah radiallahu anh. And then that conflict, who take what part there, who take what part where. So he's kind of indicating, he doesn't say it clearly, but kind of indicating that fitna is not good. I'm not just entering into this subject. Fitna, I'm not dealing with this, so I'm just reminding you about this conflict there. But it's interesting, just as a diversion, I looked at the Hidayah's translation into English by Hamilton, colonial time in Britain. The Hidayah's translation in 1800 we are speaking, he says in the second publication of that English Hidayah translation, Baghi issue is taken out. The author who translated it, in fact it's what translated, but the printer says, the publisher says, we took out this Baghi issue, because it's not an issue for the judges, that colonial judges, that they would use this as a source to judge for the Muslims issues. There's an interesting colonial dynamics playing out in production of this Baghi in relations to this authoritative frame of the Multaka, how it is being sorted. Okay, just take this one. All right, thank you very much. So that's
do you know if this was being used in India at any time?
Yes, not Multaka. Multaka used for study, but I don't know about how it is used in India for, because Cheragh Ali, at the end of it I will mention about that, when in modern time, when Multaka is being argued by the Westerners as a code of the state, as a law of the state, Cheragh Ali from India writes a critic of that claim. He says Multaka is one of the many fiqh books. Why you are arguing that Multaka as a positive law of the Ottoman Empire? That's a misunderstanding of the Multaka. So that's where India, he says, like it is used all over the Muslim world, not only Ottoman Empire, in India, in other, it is used everywhere, Multaka. In fact, by 1800, Abu Bakr Effendi went to, the Cape Town. When he went there, according to my findings, I didn't go too further down to the 1900 too much, but whatever I studied there, I find that he has reproduced the Multaka from his memory and translated into daily language there. It's Hindu and Swahili and Malaysian language together. There's a combined language together. He translated Multaka into their language in order to solve the problem of the conflict between Shafis and Hanafis. And so Multaka is used there as an authoritative, the arbitrator, discursive text from that point of view. That's another subject needs to be studied later on. And this is interesting for what I'm trying to say here. Discursively speaking, this discursive authority of the Ottoman Multaka came to be reproduced within the conflicting discursive zone to create a legitimacy for both of them. Like a kind of symbiosis between the two discursive block. Right. 5 minutes left. 5 minutes, let me just spend this 5 minutes with the last part. The last part I speak about those who spoke about the Multaka in the Western world, which I mentioned in my speech. I don't need to repeat them, but here are the names. Like the Paul Rickles spoke about the Multaka as just a book of fiqh, and then we have James Porter speak about it as a fiqh, book of the fiqh. But later on, when we come to Togarini and down to Murad, Muradja Ohsan or Dawson Murad, the tableau general of the Multaka. He translated Multaka in 1789 into French, and same year it was translated into English in Philadelphia. So in fact, when I started studying this with Rifat Abul Hajj, he says, "What is Multaka?" And I had to find that translations and wrote it to my teacher Rifat Abul Hajj. There's a whole book is translated, and also in the book it makes it for academician interested because it says book is translated and printed by Masonic Lodge in Philadelphia. It's interesting, that's a different subject there from that. But that's how this intellectual world is at that time. There are a lot of interactions and all these things from that point of view. And then we see here as a end of this debate of these presentations, I would say discursive presentations. I would just quote from Farley. James Farley says in his book, Turks and Christians, he says that Multaka is revered almost equally with the Quran. The Multaka is the religious, civil, penal, political, military code of the Ottoman Empire, and the Khatt Humayun contains scarcely an article which is not in direct contradiction to the decisions of the Orthodox doctors contained in the book. Will the Tanzimat overthrow the Multaka? The answer is plain, no. So the debate is, he's presenting the Multaka within the debate that Tanzimat is trying to be more modern, but the Multaka will not allow that one, he's saying. Multaka is a code of the state, will not allow that one. And in this discourse, there are several other also authors speaks about this type of the arguments about one, for example, Hamilton Gibbs speaks about the Muttaka, saying that look at it is from 10th century onward, Islamic 10th century onward, it is just frozen. Muttaka is the ultimate form of the Islamic law. It's frozen. There's no more ijtihad. There's no variations there. There's no other speech in the Muttaka. That is, in fact, when you look at the sharhs, you see there's a nuances there. One of the things which I saw in the sharh, I didn't bring it up here, in that sharhs, one of the issue with the baghi is that if the revolt or rebellion started by the Muslims, it's called baghi. If the rebellion starts by non-Muslims, it would be called harbi. There's a different way of dealing with these two rebel in the populations, right? And the one who started rebellion that started with the non-Muslim subjects of the state would not be considered at all treated as a baghi because it has more leverage in the treatment as a baghi as compared to the harbi. And one of the scholars from the Nablus makes a comment and says, if the rebellion starts by the Muslims, then the non-Muslims join them, they are also baghi. So that's a different opening, different extension of this normative value to the others in 1700 there. So there's a strong differences there from that point of view. So it is misclaimed to say that it's freezing, it's just like a sharks just repeats each other, and that's not the case. And in terms of the legal, the legal code that's related to the state, let me just mention this Charah Ali and complete my book. The Charah Ali says that in his book, it's printed in 1883, he says, he criticizes this by now a typical Orientalist approach to the Muttaka and says the Muttaka is not a legal code of Turkey. So Turkey meaning Ottoman, 1888. Muttaka is not a legal code of Turkey. It is one of the several treatises compiled by different authors in every age and in every Muhammadan country. And I will end with Ibn Abidin's statement, Muttaka is one of the 7 Mutun al-Mu'tabara in Hanafi fiqh. So one of the 7, it is not like just frozen one code of the state like that. But in terms of the civil reproduction of the Muttaka, many times there's a sharps, and that's the dynamics that shows us. I tried to make myself clear, but I hope it was okay. Thank you for listening, and I will take any questions.
Thank you very much, Kasım Hoca. That was a very stimulating talk, and I would say somebody who also studies on the ulama, although in the 19th and 20th century, this has been really informative for me in terms of helping me understand particular ideas of the 19th century. One of the things I wanted to ask you, Kasım Hoca, before I open the floor, is that in my own work, when Ibn Abidin you have here, who's a non-state alim, right?
Right.
And then Alim Gevdet Pasha is a state alim. And I've always made the argument of you can see a commonality in ideas between the state alim and a non-state alim in the way of understanding the state infrastructure to some degree. Do you see something similar to that in terms of this piece of work trying to bridge that non-state-state interaction of Islamic discourse?
In the compendium of the commentaries, and when we look at those commentaries, there are scholars who wrote a commentary on the Muttaka. They are very strongly engaged with the state. The Ahmad Effendi is one of them. There are others also. They also state in their introduction saying that the issues that the Messiah that comes in front of us when we are running the state needs to have interpretation. So that would help us to go back to understand these things. So that is one element there. We do see there is a state, individuals would use the Muttaka as to frame the problems of the time. In terms of the specifically about the body issue, the elements of the body, what counts the body and what's the rules there, they're quite settled by the time Muttaka is written. The shuruh, when they come out as a commentaries, they select from the previous writers to select certain qualities and features of that ibara or that normative statement, they would interpret with those selections and droppings and addings and droppings. We do see earlier multaqa before 1700, like before 1660s, 50s and 60s. Earlier commentaries on the multaqa, there are about like 20 commentaries on the multaqa during this century. There's another 20 next century, 1700 and onward. And then 1800 is reduced. When we look at those commentaries, most of the commentaries doesn't deal with the imam being haq or not haq, and just or non-just. But later on, commentators start to write about the imam needs to be haq imam, right imam. And then Damad Effendi in fact speaks about qualities of the imam in the Sharh. So he is, from the historical record, he is bringing out those issues at a time when the central authority of the Ottoman Empire start to become more weak. A lot of imams being changed, the Khilafah and sultans being azl and all these things. When you look at that, there is a connection here directly indicates there is some happening in the state reflected in this situation here. For example, in 16th century, like the 1590s, when we look at the Baghi interpretations, we don't see a lot of rebellion in Anatolia, the Jalalis and all that. We don't see too much interpretations of about the Imam and Baghi, the standard interpretations. There's no more new highlight there. And then we, in fact, when we look at the others commentaries also on the issue of the Baghi, we don't see too much of the dynamics there. I mean, there's a dynamics definitely, but not related to this subject. But between middle of the 1600, we see things are coming back again in a different way, and it becomes more comprehensive and more, the details spoken about it. So that's maybe a bridge there, I would say.
And my second question, and I'll open up. So you mentioned the first version was written in 1517, which is Selim's conquest of the Arab provinces, in which it becomes a caliphate, and then Suleiman. So what we're seeing here is a particular amalgamation between Mamluki culture and Ottoman culture to some degree. And what I'm interested about is that how does this work in terms of prior to Selim's conquest of the Arab world? Is it possible to have seen something of this being produced, or is this a response to what's happened in regards to Selim's conquest?
I thought about that a lot.
Yeah.
First, in fact, I thought about in the sense of when the Istanbul is conquered, 1450s, Ibrahim Halabi comes to Istanbul. So by the time around 1480s and 90s, maybe, we don't know exactly. So Istanbul started to become a center of attractions. To legitimize that scholarly attractions to the Arab world, they need to produce something. So Ibrahim Halabi comes and chooses that, and first of all, it's a Hanafi state. Second, it has a lot of new opportunities, and there's a new dynamics there, because in the Aleppo and otherwise there's this traditional establishment, and everyone has their positions here and there. Ibrahim Halabi has a strong connection to Hanbali families in Aleppo. He has these Hanbalite connections, and it seems like relatives, or we are not sure, or contact of him had Qadishi positions, strong positions in Aleppo, but he preferred to come to Istanbul, from whatever the reasons. And there is a possibility that this Ottomans' emergence in the regions as a new central political authority attracts that type of productions.
Does that production also attract the Ottomans to come south?
Ottomans themselves, yes, because that's the time when Shaqaiq al-Numani and others start to come out in the same
No, what I'm saying is, does that production also increase Istanbul to make the claim of going into
Arab world?
Yeah, that's right.
But there is, of course, interactions are there. That's a larger subject in terms of I had looked at only Shaqaiq al-Numaniya. The scholars who mentioned went to the Arab world and then came back. And then when we look at them all together, I have a statistic in a thesis that scholars that earlier than Ottomans would go more in the Arab world. After the Ottomans being established, they would just contain within the Ottoman zone. So that's a strong sense. And also, Shaqaiq al-Numaniya himself speaks about his title as an identity, Ottoman identity. ulama al-dawlat al-Uthmaniyya. You know, that's these are, and then others write ulama al-Halab. Ulama, you know, there is this identity things come out definitely. That's there. But on the other hand, Ibrahim Halabi's writing of this fiqh, his concentration on the fiqh started in Aleppo by most probably under Ibn Abi al-Hajj, because his other commentary on the Mundat al-Musalli is Ibn Abi al-Hajj commentary on it, and he completed a commentary on it. They were together in Aleppo at the same time, 1470s. We don't say exactly when there is a connections there, but it's the same time they were there, and he's a Hanafi, you know, good trained in Hanafi fiqh. Most probably they have connected that. So there's a maybe not official, but there's a strong Hanafi base in Aleppo, in Damascus, was continuing from the past there, and that has kind of like Ibrahim Halabi kind of brought it to the Istanbul.
Thank you. So yeah, if there's anyone in the audience who has no? Okay, so we'll leave it at for now. Kasım Hoca, thank you very much. I can continue this conversation with you over and over, but I'm going to read your thesis first before I do that. We just want to thank Kasım Hoca for coming here today and giving us this wonderful talk. Please feel free to contact the Center for any issues you have, and apart from that, thank you very much. And any last words, Kasım Hoca, before we close?
Thank you for organizing this, and this good gatherings, Majlis al-Ilm, inshallah. May Allah count it as a Majlis al-Ilm for us.
Okay, Assalamu alaikum.